So my name is Joyce Raimondo, and I'm here at the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center located in East Hampton, New York. And we are located about 100 miles east of New York City on Long Island. And this is a national landmark. It is the home and barn studio of two of the most famous worldwide artists recognized for their abstract expressionism. And this was really groundbreaking art, mainly in the 40s and 50s, and centered around New York City and this area in the Hamptons. So we always like to host special topics and special guest speakers to broaden our knowledge of art history and themes in art in general. So today we do have a very special guest. And let me just find Jen, hold on. Okay. So we have with us today, Jennifer Samet is a New York City-based art historian, curator, and writer who specializes in contemporary and post-war painting. She's the director of Eric Firestone Gallery and a member of the faculty of the New York Studio School. She's also the author of the column Beer with a Painter in Hyperallergic Weekend Edition, excuse me. So today, Jen is going to present the work of Miriam Schapiro, who is a very important artist working in New York, and I'm sure other locations as well. And I always like to find connections, Jen, between Pollock and Krasner and the artists that we present. So as I was thinking about it, what do Lee Krasner and Miriam Schapiro have in common? And what are their differences? Well, as you're going to explain today, Miriam Schapiro later in her life becomes a purely abstract artist. And Lee also is painting at times pure abstraction, not representing anything outside of herself. Lee, like Miriam Schapiro, also adhered various collage pieces to the canvas. But Miriam Schapiro is mainly, as I understand, working with fabric, whereas Lee is mainly working with cut collage and cut and paste, tearing and cutting up her former artworks. But she often also puts textured materials in her works as well. I do think one of the main differences, and you'll explore this today and we'll have time for Q&A, is Lee did not want to be known as a woman artist. Her artwork, she never recognized herself as a so-called feminist artist. And as I understand, some of Miriam Schapiro's work, but not all of Miriam Schapiro's work, addresses specifically aspects of feminist art. So I know you're going to bring this to light, and we're going to look at the art from all different facets. And also I'm excited to see, I love to see the evolution of an artist who has a long life, and to see how does that art change over time, change as the artist becomes more mature, change as new technologies are advancing. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer, who is going to present this work. And I can't wait to learn alongside everyone here. And if we have time at the end, I'll take everybody through the barn studio and the property. Okay, so let's give Jen a big welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that Miriam Schapiro also spent a lot of time on the East End of Long Island in the Hamptons as well. So she was definitely part of that same community. So, so as Joyce mentioned, I'm a director of Eric Firestone Gallery, and currently we have this exhibition on view in our 40 Great Jones, New York City location. The show is called, as you see here, Miriam Schapiro, the André Emmerich Years, paintings from 1957 to 76. And that refers to Shapiro's gallerist, who was during that time period, André Emmerich. And so we decided to focus this exhibition on that time period and on her association with that gallery. And as you can see, she showed there across almost 20 years. But in that time period from 57 to 76, her work went through very dramatic stylistic evolutions. And you can actually see in this one installation view of the exhibition, you get a sense of these different styles. So sort of in the foreground on the left, you see one of her abstract expressionist paintings, which is from the 50s. You're also seeing at that end wall a painting from the 60s, and you can see how she moved into hard edge geometric painting. You can see sort of on the right the painting that's called The Game, and we'll look at all of these more closely. In the foreground on the right, almost like an in-between between those two styles, where it has some of the geometry, but it also has the gestural painting. And then you're not really seeing in this installation photo, but she also becomes what she's really known for in retrospect as an artist is her work with collage that Joyce referred to. And as a leader of the pattern and decoration movement. So during that time period, there's these three very, very distinct stylistic evolutions, which is itself very interesting for an artist to really kind of have that conviction to move through different styles, and each one of them having, you know, in my opinion, just so much quality. So here's her birth years, 1923 to 2015, and we're looking at work from the 50s through the 70s. She was actually born in Toronto, Canada, and moved with her family as a young person to New York, went to high school in New York. Then she went to the University of Iowa for her bachelor's and her master's and her MFA, and then came back to New York City and was she came back, she got married while she was at the University of Iowa to her husband, who was also a painter. His name is Paul Brock. And so when she comes back to New York with her husband, of course, it's the height of the abstract expressionist period. And it's a very male-dominated art world, of course. And so at the time, you know, her husband is kind of the one getting all of the glory and the jobs, and you know, she is really kind of left out of the scene, which centers around, of course, a lot of drinking at the Cedar Tavern and getting together at the club. So she's trying to like really find her place in that art world. They have she has a son. And one of the things that I consider really interesting about Schapiro's work is that, as you'll see, and as Joyce mentioned, she really becomes known as a feminist artist. But what I like to think about is how some of the roots of these interests you can find even in her early work. And so even in her early work, I consider that she's starting to explore issues around the roles of women, how women are represented. And it's interesting that in her abstract expressionist work, it's not purely abstract, as Joyce sort of alluded to. So in this work, she uses source material. And this particular painting from 1954, which was actually shown at one of the early artist-run spaces that was called the Tanager Gallery. It's an homage, as you see, to Giorgione, to the painting Fête Champêtre, which is a painting that's at the Louvre Museum. This is a large-scale painting, and so if you sort of look closely, it's also variously been attributed to Titian, but you can see these figures in here. It's actually a little bit easier sometimes to see this in the in the slides than in person. And this painting, I think a lot about the idea, in addition to feminist, of what is maybe a feminine aesthetic. And this has been sort of talked about in the literature. There's a dissertation that was written about Schapiro, and she talks about this period of Shapiro's work and in relation to some feminist theorists like Lucy Lepard, and also Dori Ashton wrote about this painting, and talking about the veils in this work and the sensuous surfaces and forms, and even the kind of fragmentation of forms and associating it with a feminine aesthetic. And Dori Ashton also wrote about this kind of vigorous, lusty translations of sensuous experience, which of course the original painting, the Giorgione painting, is really about that too, and this blending and softening and melting of the paint with the surface underneath. And here's another painting from this a couple years later, from this period, also where Schapiro was using source material. She used film stills as source material sometimes, and this particular work, although it's hard to see, is actually she's using the film still from the Charlie Chaplin film, The City Lights, with the millionaire and the flower girl in here. And another painting which has a sort of figural reference within this very energetic gestural paint application. Here you can see that, she titles this painting Mother and Child, and you can see in here this image of a mother and her outstretched arms and a young child here. So Schapiro is even, becoming a little bit more overt in terms of her interest in creating these perhaps somewhat hidden meanings within her abstraction. And I also just wanted to point out here this form as well, which we'll sort of come back to, but this form that looks like a kind of opening or aperture figures into a lot of, it becomes a motif in Schapiro's work. So it was interesting when we were curating this exhibition and designing the installation to think about not only how these three different stylistic periods are so different, but also what are some of the motifs and forms that you can really trace throughout the work that recur. And here you can see a painting that is called Interview from 1959. And just to give you a sense, I included in this slide the source photograph that she used. And it's a photograph of Charles Lindbergh and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh. They're celebrating a transcontinental flight, and the actress Gloria Swanson. And so my interpretation of this painting, and maybe her interest in this particular photograph as well, it has to do with this idea of the different roles of women that women can occupy. They can be sort of supporting figures, to their husbands, or they can be perhaps agents of their own career. And so I'd like to think that maybe that is partly what interested her in this particular image, and that she was trying to explore, and how the figures sort of get buried or hide in the shadows or have a more dominant role within the painting itself and within the original image. And I should say that by this time, despite the fact that, she was very conscious of her position as a woman within this male-dominated art world, she was able to start exhibiting at the André Emmerich Gallery. So she started showing there. In 1958, she had her first solo exhibition, and she was the first woman artist to have a solo exhibition at André Emmerich Gallery. And here as well, this painting is called Facade, and the title is thought to reference as well those kinds of ideas of the facade that one puts on as a woman, as an artist, just as a person in the public. And this painting as well is what she called one of the paintings that references the theater. So you can kind of see a reference to like a stage and maybe even curtains on the side. And then there's this sort of triad of figures that could refer to the family unit. She was actually an only child, and she had one son, so perhaps her family of origin or her own family with her husband and her son, but also perhaps actors on a stage. And she said that she commented at one point that the theater is a metaphor for life, my life. It will always work most successfully for me in my art when it directly refers to my life, which is a very interesting comment because she's really talking about her, this wasn't a popular opinion at the time for art to necessarily refer to one's own life. And so even in these early paintings, she's kind of exploring that idea. A painting from 1960, which you saw in that first installation image, which is called The Game. This is actually one of my favorite paintings. Just such an interesting composition with all of that open space. And I like to say kind of has a little bit of everything, because it has all of that openness. It has this kind of gestural qualities and gestural painting in here. And then it also starts to have, it's an interesting transitional painting, because you can see in here that it starts to have this geometry. And I mentioned earlier that idea of the aperture that you can see here, this opening. And also a kind of illusionistic idea of moving back into space in here. And the color palette is really amazing, because it has these kinds of flesh tones, which you saw in some of those earlier paintings, that they refer to the body. And you can, see that in here, these flesh tones, but also, this bolder color, primary colors in here. And then the other thing that makes this an important transitional painting is that she's starting to work with this central vertical form that you see here, sort of column, which becomes also an important recurring compositional device that she uses. And she makes a kind of curious statement about this painting, The Game. And she says, in 1960, I made a picture called The Game. She says, the game is the game of making a real world on canvas. The game is also the game of knowing that the made world can never be wholly real. So that the made world can never be wholly real. A little bit of that reference to the facade or to the theater. And she says the game was the first painting to use the box, right? You can get the box as a symbol. The box became a house. And she says, I don't know what she means exactly, but she says, I could no longer live in the jungle. I built the house out of all the things I was unsure of and uncertain about, and I called it a shrine. So, the game of knowing that the made world can never be wholly real, the first painting to use the box as a symbol, the box became a house. And then she says that I called it a shrine. So you'll see what she means when I go forward a little bit. And here's another painting from this same series where you can also see this vertical column in the middle. Instead of the square or the box, she uses a circle here, which also becomes significant. And then you have that same sort of gestural, bodily, painterly forms over here. So here we go to the paintings that she called shrine paintings. And this is the first really, again, a sort of radical transition from, if you think about, just a few years earlier, she's making those abstract gestural canvases. And here she moves into these paintings that she calls shrine. And of course, references to Byzantine icon paintings, and you have this gold tones over here, some silver tones. And then you also have this, instead of the circle, she gets a little bit more overt, and you have this egg form. So she's thinking about these kinds of symbols. She's using them overtly, and you'll see increasingly she starts to use symbols in her work. And the egg, of course, being a symbol of maternity, of fertility that she's bringing into her paintings. And then, I mentioned this idea of the different roles that women occupy. So she's perhaps thinking about her roles as a mother and also as a painter with the two paint tubes. And it's all housed inside this shrine with these squares or these apertures or these windows that, have different compartments. And another shrine painting here. And this is a shrine painting that we have in the current exhibition. And you can see that she calls it homage to ML, referring to the Mona Lisa in here. So there's a couple of other shrine paintings where instead of the two paint tubes, she actually, it's an homage to art historical works. In some of the others, she makes reference to like a Cezanne painting. So this idea of certain paintings which themselves become these, icons of art history for artists. This is another amazing monumental work that we have in the exhibition, Empire 16 Windows. And she makes this painting while she's still living in New York. And it's inspired by her studio building in New York, where she has this large gridded window that she's looking at. So again, kind of reference to the home that she mentions, in that painting, the game or the house. But it's sort of an incredible gesture, really, at the time to conflate these two things, like the aperture, the window, and the home with really a symbol of high modernism, which is the grid. So she kind of takes this symbol of modernism, which the grid, which is really not supposed to reference anything in the real world that's specific. And she turns it into this combination of the grid and also the home and these windows and the aperture form. So in 1967, she moves to California. She moves with her husband, Paul Bruck, because he gets a job teaching at the University of California, San Diego. And while she's in San Diego, she's already, as you could see, starting to experiment with geometry and hard edge work and illusionism. But when she's in California, she really goes further into that. And again, she's kind of confronted with this situation where she's sidelined as a woman. The faculty is all male, and she feels like she doesn't really have a community there. And she sort of retreats into her studio. But she is kind of a natural collaborator as an artist and as a person. And she ends up finding really what you would think of as unlikely collaborators as an artist. And her collaborators become scientists who she meets at the university. So she ends up having these conversations and working with two scientists, the physicist, Jeff Raskin and David Nabeloff. Jeff Raskin is actually credited with developing the first Macintosh computer. And she starts working with these two people with very early computer technology. And what she's doing is she's plotting out these forms, and they're feeding it into the computer and generating different perspectival possibilities from these very simple forms. So she starts working with, generating these forms and experimenting, and basically like how she can turn forms around and upside down and turn them around in space to generate different compositions for her paintings. And she's also, inspired by what's happening in California in terms of the art world of the time. And there's kind of a cool California formalism that's intriguing to her. And she's also looking at the landscape and modern architecture that she finds in California. And that becomes another source of inspiration for her. This is a really monumental painting that we have in the gallery. And it's a well-known painting. There's a couple of other versions of this painting. There's actually one that's in the museum in San Diego. It's a painting that a lot of people know because it's sort of an icon of art history. So sometimes in art history 101 classes, you see this, in the slides or in the textbook. And it's called Big Ox. And it's called Big Ox because, as you can see, the form is basically like an O here and an X superimposed on this painting. But with this painting, Miriam Schapiro she's becoming involved with the feminist movement. And she considers this painting, I don't know if immediately when she makes this painting, she thinks of it like this, but she starts to realize that it's a painting that's about a woman's body, that it's about vaginal iconography. And sort of as the years go on and she talks about this painting, she refers to it in more and more explicit ways in terms of a woman's body. And it becomes, and so, you can see I mentioned from the very beginning that aperture shape that was in an early abstract expressionist painting. So the aperture, which is also like the window form or the components to the shrine, also becomes associated with a woman's body. And she says that when she makes the big ox painting, it was part of her goal her self-stated goal to make her images clearer. And this is what she says about it. She says that the painting is a very strong image with a seemingly neutral subject, the letter O superimposed on the letter X. The O was actually a hexagon with a pink labial interior whose geometry masked its sexual meaning. Its geometry masked its sexual meaning. She says, in this painting, I behaved unconsciously like all women artists mentored by men. Very interesting. I behaved unconsciously like all women artists mentored by men. I think what she's saying there is that, you sort of weren't really allowed to think of your paintings as being about being a woman or being about this kind of otherness, or maybe even being about yourself. And she says that this piece was so powerful to me that when it was finished, I turned it to the wall for 6 months before I dared approach it again. That the scholar Maddie Henkin wrote. She says, though her exact method varied over time, Schapiro always began with a simple hand-drawn shape related to vaginal iconography. The drawing would then be translated into numbers representing points on a grid that a custom computer software would rotate through space, printing out 50 views of the artist's original drawing. Once she selected her shape, Schapiro planned the composition and then used an opaque projector. So she was using an opaque projector to enlarge the image onto her canvas. She traced the shape with a pencil, taped off the contours, and spray painted. Finally, with gusto, she removed the tape. So you can see some of these other geometric paintings that she was making at the time that are also references to places in Southern California or architecture. This one was a reference to the Louis Kahn Design Salk Institute in La Jolla, and also, as she titles it, Ishtar Salk, a reference to the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war. Oops, going the wrong way. And you can see here that she's also starting to experiment with different types of surfaces. So she's using mylar here. And spray paint on canvas, as I mentioned. Another monumental piece where you can see a little bit this idea of turning objects in space. Again, this kind of aperture and sort of floating through the space in this very dramatic way. And here too, there's still a reference to the woman or the woman's body. She calls this horizontal woman. So kind of reclining, very abstract, obviously, but reclining figure in space. And what's amazing about Schapiro is that her experimentation doesn't end there. So she's gone through all of these different transitions and experimentation. But the work that she's, as I said, especially known for starts to come around this time. So she ends up teaching at Cal Arts in Los Angeles. And there she develops with the artist Judy Chicago, the feminist art program. And as part of the feminist art program, they create this amazing installation project with several of their students and local artists. So they transform this house in Los Angeles, and all of the artists involved create these installations. And all of the installations are about womanhood and feminism and women's bodies. And they all use all kinds of materials that are not traditionally associated with art making. So it's a very, very radical, collaborative group installation piece that has a big impact for years to come. And you can see on the right, Miriam Schapiro's piece that she creates for Woman House, which is this dollhouse. So it's interesting that she goes from painting those shrine paintings and even that game painting where she's kind of making reference to these, to these parts of a home or a house. And I didn't show it, but there's actually a painting in our exhibition, an early abstract expressionist painting that's called Doll's House. So there are ideas that she's thinking about, but then they become more overt and sort of more explicit and installational in this piece that she makes for Woman House. And actually, it's a little out of order. Let's see where I have. Okay, wanted to show you this painting first, because this painting that she makes in 1972 is her first painting that incorporates collage elements. And she makes this painting, she's making this painting, and she decides, perhaps maybe kind of intuitively, to attach fabric to the canvas. And she says that she attaches this, this piece of fabric to the canvas. And, of course it goes back to those compositional devices that she's using in the law and in the game, where I pointed out that, central column. It also, of course, seems to be a reference to Barnett Newman's zip paintings and to high modernism in that sense. But she's actually using lace and fabric. And she says that when she makes this painting, it's the same kind of response as when she first makes Big Ox. And she makes the painting, and then she just says, like, I was just totally, absolutely horrified by it. I couldn't believe that I could make anything so corny, which is funny, because then she goes on to make many more paintings that incorporate fabric collage elements. And it really becomes the thing that she is known for. And she starts to really embrace maybe even the idea of the corny or the sentiment. Like later she says that she starts thinking about, how sentimentality is really not something that you're supposed to have in your painting, but she starts thinking about sentiment and sentimentality kind of as an asset. And she starts to incorporate all of these fabric elements, which are, of course, associated with anonymous craft work and craft work that's made by women, into her paintings. Just go back for a second so you can see here all of the collage elements that are within this painting. Of course, this has, again, that central aperture, and it has these elements of hard edge geometric painting in there, mixing with the collage. And then again, this painting as well. And that one that we just looked at is almost like just this piece of this whole painting, Lady Genji's Maze. And another painting where she's using collage and also spray paint as part of her work. Revisiting the 16 windows motif here with spray paint, watercolor, and fabric on paper. And then fully, embracing this idea of, again, we have the window kind of format, but also, souvenirs. People start to, knowing that she is using craft work and anonymous women's work in her painting, she starts this, she amasses like an amazing collection of this material that she's using in her paintings. A reference in the title here to the Emily Dickinson poem. And, to women's work and domestic labor. So one of the things that I also especially appreciate about Miriam Schapiro as an artist is that she said that she gave a lot of lectures over her, career, and she would say that she's interested in work made by women and anonymous women's work, but she also considered that her audience should be women. She was interested in making work for women. And I find that really fascinating. And it seems very, very rare for any artist to talk about wanting their audience to be a woman. So we talked about her showing at André Emmerich. This marks 1976, the end of her association with André Emmerich. So he did show her work through all of these stylistic evolutions, but perhaps once she reached this stage and this time in her work in terms of pattern and decoration and these feminine materials, that may have been a little bit too far and sort of the end of their association. And I also wanted to mention that in 1976, Schapiro became a founding member of the Heresies Collective, which was a group of feminist political artists. And she co-authored with the artist Melissa Meyer an article which termed this work femmage. Femmage meaning collage and the feminine. But it's very interesting to actually, so we talk about femmage just being that, feminine collage, but it's interesting to really look at that article more fully because they have quite a fascinating definition of femmage where they talk about using remnants or scraps and including covert imagery. Yes, the definition of femmage, it is work by a woman, and the activities of saving and collecting are important ingredients. Scraps are essential to the process and recycled in the work. And the work has a woman life context and elements of covert imagery. The theme of the work addresses itself to an audience of intimates which I love. The theme of the work addresses itself to an audience of intimates. Thank you so much. I am happy to take any questions, comments.
At what point, hi, my name is Laz. At what point was Miriam accepted? Because you said in the beginning she didn't really have that kind of attention that her husband was getting. And at what point her transition did she really like come into her own and become, you know, like a rock star in the art world? Like when did that happen, or did it happen?
Yeah, it's interesting because nowadays we really don't see her husband's work so much, and she's, you know, she's definitely the rock star. So I think that's happened over time. You know, I think her work is like really of interest. You can see it in exhibitions, you know, worldwide. One of the works that I actually just showed is on view at the Asheville Museum of Art in an exhibition, Pattern and Decoration. So I think over time, you know, all of the experimental has become appreciated. But it's an interesting question and an interesting career, because she was certainly very conscious of the difficulties of being a woman in this male-dominated art world. And at the same time, she really had a real career, you know, which was why it was interesting to focus on those years of showing, you know, André Emmerich. So she certainly had a platform. She was in exhibitions in museums. She was in very early on in her career, a show at MoMA, the New Talent exhibition. So there were retrospectives of her work. There's a ton of literature about her. There's always more to be done. And I think, as I said, people sort of are more familiar now with the pattern and decoration work and less with her abstract expressionist work. So I'd love to see, you know, that become more well known, and also the, you know, the hard edge work. But she certainly, you know, had a real career as an artist.
Jen, there's a question in the chat.
Sure.
Both says, wonderful presentation. Do you know when is the first time that Schapiro actually spoke to the feminine iconography she was using in her work?
Yeah, hi, Bo. I'm not 100% sure when she started. I think it was fairly soon after she made the big ox painting, but I don't know that it was right away. And I know that her language was really shifted over time. And so like several years later, so she was referring to like the kind of covert imagery. And then over time, when she was reflecting on that big ox painting, she even used the C word to describe it, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say here, but she used that language. So she was interested in like really owning that, you know, vocabulary and referring to it that way. But my feeling is that I don't know the exact like date when she starts referring to I assume you're asking about the big ox painting. So I don't know when she starts to, but I think her language really like it becomes more explicit and more, I would say it becomes more confident. So, you know, at first she's thinking, you know, in that quote that I read, she's thinking of it like I was behaving unconsciously. And then over time, she's really kind of like owning that language and becoming more confident that that's what the work is about.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lucy.
Any other questions? Anything surprising anyone learned?
Yes. Hi, this is Shelley. I was so impressed with the paintings that included collage, especially of fabric, because the multimedia effects of new artists is where we are today. And she was, in a way, ahead of her time by doing that.
Yes, definitely. I agree. Way ahead of her time. And there's
I just wanted to say,
working with, craft and embracing craft now. So there was a show at the Museum of Art and Design that was probably about 6 years ago that explored this subject. So it was about, Miriam Schapiro's legacy and included contemporary artists that were dealing with craft in their work.
Mhm. And Teresa Davis from the Pollock House says, can you tell us again who wrote the article on femmage?
Yes, so that article was co-authored by Miriam Schapiro with the painter Melissa Meyer. So the two of them co-authored that term, femmage. And yeah, I wanted to read you a little bit because it's so common that, sort of in the gallery where we just talk about femmage, like, feminine collage, but it's really interesting to actually go through the article and see all of their criteria for it. And I'm sort of fascinated by that. Like there's a kind of diaristic component. There's that idea of it's for a certain audience, which I think they're talking about other women, and then using scraps. It's just such a fascinating definition.
Mhm.
I think her more geometric paintings were very they took off in all different dimensions. Like one, you'd look at one square and then it took off into a different dimension. And this happened, from what I can see, quite frequently. It's really very fascinating.
Yes. If you have a second, I actually forgot to share this. So this is downstairs in the gallery. We have her some pieces from her computer archive. So you can get a sense actually of what she was doing. These are her drawings, and you can't see them that well here, but maybe there's a better photo, the printouts that she made. So this gives you a sense of how she was using the computer, from the printer here to generate all of those forms. I didn't show this painting, but there's a painting called Keyhole. And here you can see a variation on the big ox where it's turned in space. And these are from the printer as well, the dots.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Honestly, I never realized the range of Miriam Schapiro's work. And to me, it's so fascinating how we do see a common thread, but it's very subtle through her work. This idea of the home, the opening, and just remarkably courageous as a creative person. The range is really inspiring, and even the use of technology and the projector. And then that last piece that you showed in your presentation with the apron.
Yes.
It's so beautiful. It looks so ephemeral and so monumental at the same time. And to me also, it really does celebrate women's work It's just, but in such a creative, innovative way. And I think it's very relatable to women, actually, even today.
Yes.
That's just my opinion.
Mm.
And then the way she did the big ox painting, it is so interesting how it's like feminine and analytical at the same time. It just has all these contradictions in it. It's like, it's just so inspiring to me. So thank you.
My
Yeah, you
pleasure.
really have to look at her work a lot. I mean, even one piece, you have to just look at it a long time. She's very interesting.
So Jen,
Very.
tell us, with the exhibition in New York, if people can't make it to New York City, can you tell us how they could see the work online or learn more about it, the exhibition?
Sure.
Is there
Yeah,
other
I'll put
venues?
it's Eric Firestone Gallery.com. And put it in the chat. And yeah, there's images and installation photographs on our website. And yeah, you can access them there.
And Bo says, is Big Ox for sale?
Yes, that's
We'll split the bill.
so we're hoping that Big Ox also lands at a major museum. And yeah, where it should be.
I just wanted to, it's always bothered me that, it's like craft, women are doing craft and, they're doing quilt and they're amazing pieces of art, but it's like, oh, it's just craft, and it's, yeah. So I really enjoyed her craft.
Yes. Yeah, that it's diminished, you mean, by calling it craft.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
it's, yeah, it's very, angers me.
Yes, I think that was definitely one of her concerns. And she really was a force. I don't know, I didn't really say that, but she was really a force, and she really became involved in the feminist movement, and so all of these issues were of great concern to her. There was a question, I think, Jacqueline.
Yeah, I was wondering, did you say that the craft that she incorporated into her work, it was anonymous, it belonged to other craftspeople, or was it craft that she made and then incorporated?
Well, I was just referring to the idea that a lot of craft work is anonymous. So it's not all necessarily anonymous, but that, a lot of craft work, as a generalization, it doesn't have like an author associated or a particular artist with it. So I think that was part of her. That was part of, her interest, was that, exactly what I think it was Joyce was saying, that, that this craft work is and its importance is often diminished. So the idea of like incorporating this work into modernist painting was fascinating to her.
Tell you what, when you come, this is Gary Adamak. I knew Mimi and Paul since the early 2000s. My wife was Ruth Appelhoff, who knew Mimi back in the 80s and 70s and 80s. And I used to work with Mimi, and you talk about, was it, did she borrow or whatever, the different crafts and things like that. I used to work with her in a studio, and I'd help her move stuff around. And she had more drawers and closets worth of materials that she would just pull out. So I would say, was she copying anyone? I would say no, she was producing or creating or inventing things on her own from her. This studio was unbelievable. She would just cut and paste and slice and dice and kind of move things around. So it was fun to be with her.
Oh,
Thank
I
you
didn't,
for
yeah,
sharing that.
I didn't think of it as copying. I was thinking of it as her collaborating with craftspeople and then using their work. And that's what I meant by did she incorporate collaborations that she did with others.
Well, I'm not an
Would
artist, so I'm
really
just giving
interesting.
you a different point of view. I'm not
Yep,
saying
no,
she
it's great.
didn't collaborate. I have no idea. All I know is what I saw.
Thank you.
I love to see craft creeping into the into the mainstream of art. We're going to call it art, whether it's craft or not. We're calling it all art, and I think that that's terrific.
Everybody, I'm sorry, I missed the discussion. It sounds like there's a debate going on. Our internet cut off.
Oh.
We're gonna need to close now because I know that Jennifer, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share this with the public worldwide and really to highlight the accomplishments of Miriam Schapiro. And everybody give Jennifer a big Zoom round of applause.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hope this makes you want to learn more, everyone. And also, this will be recorded, it will be edited, and it will be posted on my YouTube channel, which is Joyce Raimondo YouTube. It will be posted on the Pollock-Krasner Facebook page. And I'm also going to send Jen a copy to the link, and you can post it wherever you'd like as well. If anyone is watching this on YouTube, please subscribe because that supports the channel. So, and thank you so much again.